Friends, I welcome you to my channel. Before listening to this story, I will ask you to like and subscribe. It is not difficult for you, but it is pleasant for me. And we're starting. All the characters in the story are over 18 years old. Elaine Austin stopped walking toward the door, ready to leave the church. The sea of people chatted, as it always happens after the end of the service. The church was not only a spiritual, but also a social event. In small towns like Hidden Acres, this was the main point of communication for many people. Elaine's eyes were fixed on Lydia Wilson. Removing the dark sunglasses from her face, she folded them and rushed through the crowd. Men and women were moving smoothly out of Elaine's way. At almost 5 feet 11 inches tall, she was taller than most of the women in the church. As the head of the junior league and her husband, the senior partner of the only real law firm in town, she was a powerful woman. Unsurprisingly, the crowd easily parted in front of her. Most of the eyes in the hall were glued to her. Lydia walked over to Elaine and turned to face her, her eyes shining and her laughter sounding light. Elaine could see it from across the room and wondered if any of the other women in the order had noticed it. Lydia has become a different woman, and it's for the best. It is not uncommon for new women to be accepted into the order, but it was rare enough that most participants could only recall a few from their lives. Elaine, like some other women from the junior league, knew how to spot some telltale signs when an outsider stumbled in their path. Looking at Lydia shining with such radiance, Elaine was sure that this was exactly what had happened to her. "Elaine, are you here?" Lydia's voice interrupted her thoughts, and she was forced to apologize. "I'm sorry," she said, not taking her eyes off Lydia. "What did you say?" "I was wondering if you knew Dorothy Tennant." Elaine turned and blinked slowly. She completely lost sight of Dot standing next to her. "Of course I know Dot. We're old friends, aren't we?" Stepping back, she took another look at her old rival, seeing some of the same signs she had noticed in Lydia. With a smile, she pushed away the thought that Dot was single and had no children to talk about. "Well, if by old friends," Dot said with a touch of sourness, "you mean you stole my boyfriend and married him, then yes." Dot smiled casually at Elaine, and then looked back at Lydia. Lydia's shocked look made both women laugh. Guileless, Lydia was bad at hiding her surprise, a skill she had never had to learn like Elaine. "I mean, look at you two. You could almost be sisters," Lydia said, but immediately regretted it when both women gave her dark looks. "I mean, you're both so gorgeous. Any woman in town would die to have your figures." "I know I would like to." Elaine smiled warmly at the breathless woman, and then waved her hand, waving away the praise. "Don't underestimate the price, Lydia. You're a cool thing on your own. I'm sure you'll get as much attention as you want." The blush that flared on Lydia's cheeks confirmed Elaine's suspicions. She watched Lydia's eyes darting around the room and then back again. Following the other woman's gaze, she spotted Kyle Wilson in the foyer. Lydia's son's eyes were glued to his mother. He only looked at the people he was talking to out of a sense of politeness. Kyle looked as happy as the newlywed himself. Elaine turned to Dorothy, examining her more closely. There was a glow in the woman she had hooked up with earlier. It wasn't as obvious as Lydia's glow, but it was there, just below the surface. Dot couldn't help but smile nervously when she realized that Elaine was evaluating her. "Yes," Dot finally asked. "There have been a lot of changes lately. First Sandra, then Lydia, and I dare say you're on the edge too." "The edge of what?" Dot asked, trying to soften her tone. "Oh, I'm not sure," Elaine said slowly, squinting slightly. "Is there a new man in your life?" "Huh." Dot laughed too loudly. The people next to them turned around to look. "You know, I'm not going to date anymore. I'm not going to mess with some middle-aged gasbag who wants me to cook and clean for him." "And yet," Elaine insisted, "there's someone new in your life." "Oh, didn't I tell you? Maybe I'll hook up with your son, Mark, and then I can call you Mom." Lydia took a startled step back because of the fury that flashed in Elaine's eyes. It only lasted a split second, and Elaine silently cursed for letting herself slip out. "Well, it just would never have happened," she replied coldly. "Why is that?" That reveled in the momentary crack in perfection that Elaine was. "Well, if you could, I would kill you." Elaine turned to Lydia and hugged her. She whispered in Lydia's ear, "You have to come to lunch. Soon." Breaking off the embrace, she shook her head, admiring the blooming Lydia. Stepping back, she unfolded her sunglasses and put them on. And for the record, Elaine said, not looking at it, but her tone left no doubt who those words were meant for. You could never have lured my son if I hadn't wanted this to happen. Elaine left, leaving the women behind her. It's been over 20 years. Why couldn't it let it go? Holy, Lydia caught herself, realizing at the last moment that she was still in the church. Lydia and Dot watched as Elaine made her way through the thinning crowd and out through the main doors into the bright sunlight. I think Mark owes me, Dot said cryptically. Lydia looked at her in confusion, and then Dorothy waved her hand. Mark Austin was waiting in his mother's Mercedes-Benz, wondering how long she would stay. There were weeks when she chatted with the old ladies for an hour after the service, and he lost his patience. Sunday was his favorite day of the week, despite the obligatory attendance of divine services. His mother's rules. It's a small price, he said aloud to himself. A moment later, he smiled broadly when he saw her leave the building. She sat in the driver's seat and stared at him for a long time, as if deciding whether to say something or not. Mark fidgeted nervously, wondering if he had done something to anger his mother. Was she trying to figure out how to punish him? Her lips curled into a cruel smile, and then she started the car and sped out of the parking lot. Call home, Elaine said, and the radio went off and the phone rang from the speakers. A moment later, there was a click and a cheerful voice saying hello. You and Dad are waiting for us to come home. The binding ritual. Okay, Mark's sister Rebecca said excitedly, and hung up the phone. Mark couldn't keep the grin off his face. When they arrived home, Mark ran out of the car and into the house. He saw his sweet little sister rushing up the stairs with a clear vinyl bag. The binding ritual, he shouted loudly, and Becky squealed with delight. He raced past the stairs to the study located in the far corner of the house. A few minutes later, both men were dressed in formal clothes, and his father took him out of the house into the garden. After giving away a pair of scissors and taking one for himself, Mark's father told him to cut roses. Red, white, and yellow. They cut out several pieces of each color and then went inside to trim and arrange them. Are you ready? Becky called from above. The men rushed to the base of the stairs, one on each side, with a bouquet in their hands. Yes, Stuart called, as excited as Mark was. The wedding procession played through the home sound system. While Boom 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 was playing, two women appeared upstairs in wedding dresses of the same color but different styles, white veils on their faces. Mark was stunned by the beauty of his mother, who was dressed in an elegant dress. Becky was wearing a ball gown. She was smiling so hard as she came down the stairs that Mark wondered if she had hurt herself. Her eyes darted from Mark to their father, twinkling like the diamond earrings she wore as they both looked at her in awe. When they reached the bottom, Elaine took her son's hand and the flowers he offered her. Becky did the same with her father's offerings. Holding hands, they walked in pairs to the solarium, from where they could see most of the valley where Logan's logging camp was originally located. They stood so that Elaine had her son in front of her and her husband on her right. In front of Becky was her father, and on the right was her brother. Mark silently regretted that he had not thought of installing a camera to capture this moment, but he knew that his mother would never have allowed this. Instead, he tried to memorize every detail of this solemn ceremony. As a priestess of the Jacqueline order, Elaine began in a reverent voice. She stared at Mark intently, making him feel that her words were addressed only to him. I encourage my family members to take part in the binding ritual. Today we seal our love as a family, bind ourselves to each other above all else, and swear not to make a higher vow than this one. We give ourselves freely. We receive the love given to us voluntarily. We swear to love, protect, and respect each other. We will not put anyone above those with whom we associate ourselves today. Mark looked at his sister and smiled. He suggested that she wouldn't be happier if it was her real wedding day. Becky turned and saw him looking at her, and her eyes widened in desperate anticipation. Elaine and Stuart broke off the kiss, and then the parents turned to their offspring in front of them. Stuart reached out and lifted the veil from Becky's face. Mark turned to his mother, finding that her veil was in place, and she came closer to him, lowering her eyes in supplication. Mark turned around and saw his younger sister looking at him. However, she couldn't keep the shy expression on her face for more than a second and broke into a wide smile. When the brother and sister's kiss ended, they all applauded loudly, and the two women hugged. Elaine took Becky and Mark by the hand and led them away. Becky grabbed her father's hand, and the four of them headed back to the stairs and up to the master bedroom. Dude, sometimes I feel sorry for everyone who is not part of this family, Mark said. Becky walked up to him and said, "Why is this my gorgeous brother? Just look at you. You and Mom are just wonderful," he emphasized his words. "Oh, look," Becky said, stepping back. Stuart whistled, and Becky beamed at his praise. Elaine approached her handsome son with a predatory look. It still amazed Mark that he was so lucky to have a family. His mother's genetics alone would be a lottery win. But to be able to be her lover? His mind was clouded by his luck. The whole family loves this game and often conducts such experiments every year. Everyone likes it very much. How do you like this bonding game? The end of the story.